With your host, Adrian Younge.
An idea is a conception of the mind, sparked by cognitive or precognitive thoughts that are derivative of experience and perception. Ideas are progressive as much as they can be regressive, but nevertheless, ideas are the building blocks of progress. And as leaders, we bear the responsibility of maintaining positive ones for our people. There are good ideas, there are bad ideas. Brilliant ideas often occur with a combination of circumstances, including people, conditions, perspectives, and history. Conversely, bad ideas evolve from the same components. The value of these ideas are more accurately assessed from the vantage point of hindsight. This is because great ideas are prospective. They are generated for the future. They forecast the conflation of molecules in an organism, our system being that organism. A formation of life that contains mutually interdependent parts that maintain our vitals, our vital thoughts. In other words, I'm talking about the formation of ideology. At times, these interdependent parts synthesize virtue and benevolence with selfishness and malevolence. The Americas serve as the perfect example. And when we study the origin of ideas, we find that world leaders, or the institutions that we trust, manage the formation of ideas or ideology of those that are too lazy to think for themselves. So when I speak upon conceptions of the mind and the formation of ideology, the weight falls from the top. In colonized America, our British metropole fermented the idea that my ancestors were barbarous creatures that needed to be civilized. The Spanish and the Portuguese inspired Britain's ideology, but the conflation of their ideas actually existed over 1,000 years before the transatlantic slave trade with the trans-Saharan, or what some refer to as the Arab slave trade, with only one exception. Islamic law forbid the enslavement of African Muslims. Nevertheless, there was an ideology born out of the primordial desire of power, not power to the people, but power over the minds and bodies of other human beings. In order to facilitate this control, nefarious ideas had to be churned into ideology. Despicable ideology had to be churned into mythology. Misleading mythology had to be turned into custom and tradition. Centuries of disillusionment had to serve as the firewall to protect the sanctity of the original idea. In America, our institution is based on the perception that our Declaration of Independence, coupled with our Constitution, was the illest idea of all time, that it serves as our imperviously drafted covenant, our moral compass turned into substantive law. But America fails to understand that the idea of American slavery, the chattel system, preceded these ideas by well over a century. This is the original idea, and revisionist history has firewalled the nexus between the way our ancestors were treated and the way we are treated today. I repeat, ideas are the building blocks of progress. Ideas contain mutually interdependent parts that mold our vital thoughts. The conflation of ideas create ideology, and ideology establishes control. As applied to art, we have the power to express ideas that exemplify identity, ideas that perpetuate the power of self, regardless of hue, creed, or ethnicity. Religion is a faith, but it's also an ideology. Race is a fallacy, but racism exists without the certification of the term race. Just replace it with ethnicity. In many ways, actors bear the responsibility of making ideas appear to be real. They are hypothetical vessels of reality that change the way we view one another. And on today's Invisible Blackness, I'd like to bring on a special vessel, a special actor, a black man that has made a career out of identifying with different ideas on and off the screen, an MC, a writer, a father, a Muslim American that has received a myriad of accolades, including 2 Academy Awards, 3 SAG Awards, BAFTA, Golden Globes, and Primetime Emmy Awards. He's been named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. New York Times ranks him as one of the top 25 actors of the 21st century. I'd coin him as one of the illest MCs you have yet to hear. I'm excited to announce my dear friend, Mr. Mahershala Ali. How are you, brother?
I'm good, brother. How are
Yes,
you, man?
man.
Thank you so much.
Of course,
I appreciate
man.
it. I appreciate
Welcome,
it.
welcome. You know,
Good to be here.
Thank you. Let's get into it.
All right.
As an individual, I always tell people that you are the best version of yourself. The question is, how much are you willing to refine the idea of self, the conception of personal aspiration? Tell me about your journey and how you came to refine the idea of becoming the best version of Mahershala Ali.
I'm still fighting for it. I'm still fighting for it. You know, I appreciate you saying that everybody is the best version of themselves. I would say, at least what's true for me, is that I've struggled from a very early age to focus on really just being the best version of myself, right? And I think that throughout my 40-some odd year journey or whatever, being around, there's times where you feel closer to fully living in your truth and your strength. And there's times where you feel weak, and sometimes that's usually when you find yourselves in a flock following, right? And so I think some people who really shine, whether we fully agree with everything that they seem to put out in the world, there are some people that do feel like they're shining from the standpoint or the perspective of living their truth, you know, as full as they can. And that's a real commitment. That's a real thing that requires courage, because there's usually there's a period of time, whether it's within your own home or within your own school or town or city, where the thing that makes you you is not popular. Right? It's not going to be understood, right? And so you're going to have to consistently practice this muscle of persistence and self-determination and sort of like a real clarity about how you see yourself, because usually you won't get supported on that at first, until eventually people are like, yo, I want to wear my pants backwards too, right? Or whatever, I'm being silly, but you know what I'm saying? Like there's a thing that might feel like a real organic expression of yourself, but there's a chance that that's not going to be supported for a period of time.
Absolutely.
Until at a certain point, a bunch of people are doing what you're doing to some degree, and you have to, you know, you may be looking for other ways to define yourself. And that's true for artists as well, musicians, actors. You put out material, you put out an album, and people identify. At first, there's no believers, and you put it out, and then you got an audience. You put out another thing, the audience grows, and then they want Nas to do Illmatic 10 albums in, right? Again, and, you know, and so there's this thing where you're constantly fighting to try to be your best self, and that will continue to, if you're living right, that has to continue to evolve, because life is a living, or the world is an organism.
I love what you're saying about this fight. And over the years, we've known so many people that are way more talented than we are, but didn't make the choice to be the best version of themselves, right? And then you start learning about the concept of self-sabotage, and you see them in certain positions where they should win, but they don't win.
Right.
So in analyzing this and us refining ourselves to be the best version of ourselves, something I've said to many people over the years is that you have to really understand the concept of fear, right?
Right.
Because I say fear causes trauma to the brain, and that trauma causes paralysis to the mind and the soul. And the antidote,
which must impact the ambition too.
You know what I'm saying? Exactly.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But the antidote to this is understanding. And it's understanding your mission, finding yourself. Because people are constantly searching for props, searching for awareness of themselves, but then they're not looking at themselves to be the best version of themselves, because when you are that and you're continually working on that, then you become a vacuum for all the things that you want to come to you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Or an engine.
Exactly.
And in that you can, so there's this, we cannot ignore the conditions of our circumstances in our life, right?
Absolutely.
And like you can't be in California in August wearing a parka. It ain't.
Right.
We ain't in Antarctica, right? You got to be mindful of your conditions. So It is a reality that the conditions of many of our environments, sometimes families or whatever, aren't always necessarily conducive to us being successful. But the one thing that we can do is within our power, be our best self within the confines that we all experience, and some just have a much broader runway than others. Right. But everyone to some degree is experiencing some limitations, some groups way more than others. Right. But my point is that I think there becomes that much more pressure for you to be like, well, I'm not getting help from nothing outside of me. The only way I'm going to move down this block is if I figure out a way on my own to move down the block, you know? And I think that's when, in some ways, when we can make sure that we're doing everything that we can do to make our situation and circumstances better, I feel like in some ways that's when some of and maybe that's more of a faith, religious, ideological approach, but I feel like that's when sort of life, God, spirit can show up for you in more obvious ways when you are doing everything in your power to improve your conditions, you know?
And this, to me, this reflects exactly what you said when you thanked your grandmother.
Yeah.
You know, when you got your Academy for Greenbook.
Yeah.
And she said that, you know, you wanted to dedicate this award to your mother because she said that if you don't at first succeed, try again, and just it's the diligence.
That was my grandmother.
Right.
And you know, from as long as I can remember, one thing that she did with all her grandkids, my grandmother and I were especially close. I was there a lot, you know, and lived with her for a period of time. And in that, she would always tell her grandchildren, like, I remember walking around in Lucky's grocery store or go to McDonald's every Friday, and she'd be drilling me. At first, you don't succeed, try again. You could be happy, you could be miserable, it's left up to you. Life is what you make it. She would tell me as a kid, you have $500 million. She would be like, you have $500 million. And he's like, and you tell yourself that every day, God has everything. God has everything, you just ask him. Like, so it was a mentality for somebody who she didn't come from much, she came from Beaumont, Texas, you know, but that instilling in me this idea of I could do anything I put my mind to is a very thing that has kept me through many years of a career feeling like I was not making any headway. Yeah. But I think her spirit approach gave me so much hope to keep believing as an exercise, as a muscle. I'll give you one quick example. I was, this was mid 90s, and I'd have graduated in 96 or whatever, and I graduated from school, and I got this job on these, I graduated from school and I was doing California Shakespeare Festival. And so I was trying to figure out how to get to how to get to grad school. So it's like summer theater, right? Professional actors and whatnot, and apprentices and whatnot. So I was in there, and I did it for the summer, and I knew I was gonna audition for NYU in January. And so this is like October or something. I'm living with my grandparents, fresh out of graduating, and I got this little job in San Francisco working at the Gavin magazine, recording record spins. And so I'm making minimum wage by the time I pay to park and come. I'm not making no money, but I just want to be in the record. I just want to be in the building, right? But my grandmother knew I was auditioning for NYU in February, and she says to me, I walk in my room, and she'd gone to Kmart and bought some sweats and whatnot. She put them on my bed, and it was like, it's California, it's the Bay, and it was warm at that time. And also, this just wasn't my vibe, whatever, but she goes, "You're gonna need these when you go to New York." And she just walked out. That was it. It was like, and I knew they accept 18 kids. Like, there's no, they're auditioning around the country. Right. And I felt good I felt good. I just felt like I had something to say as an artist of mine. How much I understood myself at that time, I felt like I had something to say. But, you know, what were the chances of me like necessarily getting in? But she would do things that I think exhibited her belief, which I think infused me with a certain type of of confidence, you know, and willingness to be like, well, I want to try that. Because one thing she'd always say is all they can do is say no, which also impacted me in why I asked to play the lead cop on True Detective. Like my grandmother was in my head, because she would always say, all you got to do is ask. You basically pitch yourself. If they say no, they say no. And I've done that throughout my career.
But they didn't want to give you that, right?
Well, it's not that they didn't want to give me, they didn't offer that to me. They offered me basically the supporting role.
But if I'm not mistaken, you had a family member that was a cop, right?
My grandfather was a cop. So not my grandmother's husband, my mom's father. So the grandmother I'm speaking of is on my dad's side.
Yeah.
But my mother's father was a California state police officer.
Wow.
Way back, you know, and so, 60s, 70s. And so this story took place in, originally it was written in 79. So I really thought of my grandfather, and he edged it up to 1980. And as soon as you hear 1980 out of 79, that decade switch, everything's different.
It's totally different.
Everything. Yeah. That 1 year, you're out of there, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so, so he did make that little switch. But that was my mother's father. I sent him a picture of, several pictures of, and basically said, I didn't want to just pitch myself, because there's this thing that, because the time we live in, and there's this like healthy pressure to diversify things, that in pitching an Asian artist or a Black artist or Latinx artist or whatever, there's also this concept of, well, you didn't really exist in the Game of Thrones era, but we'll kind of, or even though that's some future back fan, and they do an amazing job with the show. But my point is, there's these ideas that we're kind of fudging something to kind of like diversify the world when we go backwards somehow.
Yeah.
And so reason I sent that picture, because it felt like it made what I was saying real, that like, we actually existed in this time. And not only was it like we actually were state police officers, like, not just, not just that as an idea, or it would work for this era because we need to diversify television.
These are the kind of things that an actor, a person, an artist like yourself has to do to add more valuation towards our culture.
Yeah.
Because we have to constantly explain why we should have an opportunity. And in doing so, we have to constantly place ourselves in the position to exceed expectations when opportunities arise.
Right.
Because when we're talented, the question is whether we're just idiot savants. The answer is never that we're born to do something.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, but with you, I remember when we started working together on Luke Cage.
Yeah.
Me and Ali Shaheed were just so blown away by your performance. And there was this whole conversation about, and I don't want to spoil it to our listeners, but should he leave early or not? You know what I'm saying?
If they ain't seen it by now.
Okay, fair enough.
They sleep.
You're right. Yeah. So when you left, we were like, what? Because you were our favorite, and that just, I really loved how you displayed this character and how you own this character. And something that is very interesting with you is how you are able to become a character, right? You're this vessel, this hypothetical vessel that is now providing a perspective for the world to understand Blackness.
Yeah.
You could be the worst thug in the world, but you will still do something to show where our moral compass is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I ask you this because I feel like this is all predetermined by you. It's all part of your plan. You don't just accept any role. You accept roles where it allows you to use your voice to amplify something that you feel in your heart. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I think that when you read, see, hear certain things, depending on wherever you're coming at it, you just know. right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, when you 15 years old and that one joint comes on, the video comes on, you're on
Right.
TV raps and you like, and you see Souls of Mischief,
Right.
and they're in the woods, and you like, oh my God,
We all
like
remember that.
what is
Yes, we
this
all
moment, right?
Yes.
And like that's an extreme example, but I think that there's some degree of reading something, coming across a script, a story, an idea, and that vibration going off, that little mini explosion that wakes up your spirit, that wakes your body up holistically, like all around, like hits every part. And I just think inherently with I think what my own sort of spiritual responsibility is, like that light only goes off when all those things are checked, right? And so, you know, I always, of course, you want people to feel entertained, but I don't necessarily feel like I have permission just to entertain people. It doesn't, but that could mean when you look at a career, when you look at like the combination of all your qualities and your voice and how it lands out there in the world, there's a necessity to sort of diversify the tiles in your mosaic that speak for your career. So
Beautiful.
Denzel can't always be the upright, righteous brother. Like
Right.
that's not conducive for us as a community. You have to humanize other types of people.
Yes.
Right? And then in using that talent to humanize as many types of people as possible, you can't uncarry this. You always take that with you. That's so in a certain way, you get to put your signature on these stories throughout the time of your career that say, here's a life, here's a life, here's a life. So you can't say you don't know me now, right? Like, and you know, so to speak, right? You can't say you don't know Awan,
Right.
or name a character, whatever, Tizzy from Benjamin
Right.
Button or whatever.
You know, this concept of humanizing,
Yeah.
it's something that I debate with many people, many of my peers. I look at people as people. And I look at our people as our people.
Yeah.
At the same time, I look at people that have a different skin color as my people.
Right.
So I approach the analysis of race relations with humility, because when I see pictures and or videos of racist people getting beat up and all that stuff, that don't make me happy.
No.
So people act like there's an issue because I can be on both sides and find their humanity as people. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's always important to see both sides of the issue, but I don't think that because you see both sides of an issue, it doesn't mean that it changes the definition of right and wrong per se.
Right. Exactly.
Right? You know, it doesn't mean that it doesn't make it gray.
Right.
You know, there's always real value in understanding where someone is coming from and how they developed the ideas that they had. But if you still walk out and you shoot somebody, the fact is there's someone who's lost their life over you taking that power into your own hands. But I think what happens is arrogance begins to creep in. And when arrogance begins to creep in, it can justify all the atrocities that we've seen from the beginning of time.
Yes.
And so the humanizing is also a humbling. It's about connective tissue. It's about saying like, oh, this brother over here that lives in this foreign country is actually trying to feed his children too.
Yeah.
And that mother over there is trying to get, you know, her child to school and is carrying 2 jobs as well. Like, they're people too. Like, they're not, you know, so once you start getting into like the nuances of people's lives, I think people are able to see themselves in the other story, which will allow you to begin to talk, not necessarily as friends, but at least nothing is going to change without there being conversation, right? And I think over time, you know, 2 friends can have a conversation about who their favorite rapper is, and over time that can change, you know, your favorite book or whatever. And so I just think that there's something in communication that allows for people to kind of hear where the other person is coming from. And whatever right is, whatever truth is, whatever justice, I think it does lean a certain way, and eventually it's gonna have to go that way. But I think as a basic foundational requirement, we have to have communication, and therefore we can begin to see each other as human. Because you can't say that somebody stringing somebody up on a rope, right, or chasing them down in a vehicle and shooting them with a shot, you can't tell me that you see that person as human. Like, you can't.
Exactly.
You couldn't do that if you saw that. I mean, maybe you could. You know?
Well, you know, this concept of humility is empowering.
Yeah.
A lot of people look at humility as something that's weak,
yeah,
but it's empowering, because I'm not going to be racist towards a white person.
Right.
Even though there are years, centuries,
right,
of them using race to subjugate our people.
Right.
I'm not going to be racist towards them.
Right.
And this concept of humility is something that our greatest leaders had to find.
Right.
Two that I could think of is Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And, you know, they're great leaders that influenced those people around them at their time. Now, they were, I don't want to say that they were diametrically opposed on issues, but they were far apart.
Yeah.
And towards the end of their career, they started to become closer and closer together in ideology before they were murdered. And they went from trying to solve problems of civil rights to now trying to solve problems dealing with global human rights. And I ask you, how has your personal growth and ethnicity as a Black American Muslim changed the way you view human justice or human injustice around the world?
I think it's just expanded it, you know. I think it's I would hope being more aware of what's going on in the world and in countries, in places other than you live. I would hope that is just a natural outgrowth of just your roots.
Yeah.
Going deeper, you know, and realizing how interconnected we all are. The world is smaller now from the standpoint of being able to see things that are going on in places that you didn't even know existed before, and the ability for any one person to be a reporter or to report on something.
Yeah.
There's these avenues in which these things can make it into the public consciousness, right?
Right.
So I just think that I think that there's ways in which we can be impacted a little bit more in our time now. But I do think that everything starts more personal. What is going on with me and my family, in my house, in my neighborhood, with my people, in my state, in my country, you know, and then and you can live a life in that circle, you know. But I think that there are real opportunities to really sort of embrace what is going on globally, and see some of the similarities and the real differences in the issues. And eventually, hopefully, we all rise to which is obviously it's going to take time, continued time, but hopefully we all rise to a place of like self-dignity and freedom of expression. And
this is why I say that you can't really understand life, you can't really understand your own life until you actually travel the world.
Yeah.
Because you start to see different standards of living, you start to understand different perspectives.
Yeah.
And you also get to have a better understanding of the kinship that we should have around the globe.
Yeah.
You get to see how people that look just like you are treated in other places.
Right.
You get to see, if you go into Latin America, somebody with your skin color many times is not even referred to as Black.
Right.
But
Right.
over here it's like, huh?
Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It gets so deep, and then it starts opening up your mind.
Yeah.
Because as we discuss these topics, we're truth seeking, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of truth seeking, religion is a choice. And you chose to become a Muslim like a little over 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And you made this choice even though you grew up in a home where your mother was an ordained minister.
Yeah.
How difficult was it for you to make this religious conversion? And do you have any advice for others that want to make the leap but they fear persecution by their people?
Well, the last the end of the question, I would say, I think you kind of have to choose your persecution.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that if you're gonna live truthfully,
Yeah.
you either are gonna have to experience a period where people don't understand that, which can hit you so hard that you deem it and term it as persecution. It can be absolute persecution and getting cut off from family and friends and weird stuff happening.
Yeah.
Or you can deny what you personally feel called to and live in denial of that.
Wow.
And experience your own slow persecution from not admitting what you feel truly called to. Like, that's the worst to me, is
Wow.
because you quietly have to do that to yourself to tamp that down,
Right.
that thing until it dies, right?
Right.
And so I feel like that's a muscle. There's a call and response in life where you feel you get the message to come to something, to be drawn to something, to evolve and advance towards your own personal truth on your journey in this time. And sometimes we say yes to things, and maybe that chime will pop back up years later, or a year later, or a month later, and that fear in you, or just the fear of your culture, people around you, may have grown stronger, and you say no again, and eventually that chime gets a little quieter and quieter, and sometimes people get later on in life, and out of desperation,
Yeah.
and it's too late.
Right.
You know, so I think it's kind of like, for me, pick what mountain you want to climb. You know, the high one or the high one. You know, so that on that
Yeah.
for me, because I don't think there's any way around. I don't think there's any way around your conscience, around your voice.
Right.
You know, you may get very good at covering it. You may develop the armor to build the muscle up around your truth, but that means that you are further away from yourself, and you can't tell me that you're being the best version of yourself when
Right.
you're not listening to yourself,
Right.
right? You can't.
Exactly.
You're being the best version of yourself following other people.
Exactly.
And, you know, and I'm not trying to speak from any position of authority or having figured it out or been successful in that way. It's to me, it's lifelong work. The more successful you get, it's lifelong work, because you have more comforts and people are comfortable
Yeah.
with seeing you how they see you, right? And so as your voice begins to speak for you and how you need to evolve and change, you gotta ignore all these voices that are telling you you're great exactly where you're at, you know? So there's that. The other thing was with my mom, I would say, my mother, she was young. She was in high school. My parents were in high school when I was born, and they were married. They got married in high school and all that.
Oakland?
They were in, at that time, I want to say Union City, kind of. My dad was in Hayward, my mom was in Union City. But my dad had moved out from Alameda. He just moved out actually from Alameda, so because they were out there, my family, my dad's side. And so she was like young when she had me. But her mom was an ordained minister. And my mom comes from a family of 5 girls. And so as my mother and my father split around when I was 3 or whatever, I stayed with my mom. By the time I hit like 10, 11, 12, she had been focused in a way that I had never understood her to be focused in her studies, in her religious studies. And so I left home around 16, in part because things began to get very tight, which was somewhat also, not to like blame or put anything on my mom at all, but I think it's just naturally reflective too of her conversion. Not that she grew up Christian, but there's a time when you may begin to like really take on those tenets and those attributes, and some people go like really deep, you know? And so I think as a kid who felt like, I think my freedoms were sort of like shrinking as an adult, she's coming into her consciousness. And as a kid, I'm coming into like about to hit puberty, and then like there's certain freedoms and things that you're expecting to have going off of how you were coming up earlier. But like her world is getting smaller and more confined and more focused and lasered in on what she needs to do on behalf of God, so to speak, you know. So I didn't experience, because I didn't convert until I was like 25. I had already had some years where I had space away from the ideology of my mom and stepfather's house, right? Which was important for me, because it's important for any kid, like at some point to have space so that you can really check in and be like, are these my ideas? Are these their ideas? Are they ideas I agree with? I feel like, so because I had some clearance and space, I was really fully, deeply into my own examining of religion and how I related to it and what I wanted, what I understood to be true. And the biggest thing that was ringing in my heart before I could articulate it, before any religion articulated for me, was I just had issue with Jesus in the church. It felt like he was elevated above God. Like he was spoken about so much where I just didn't feel like God had his proper place, and I could not find that anywhere. And then so when I started going through my little studies and reading these different books and different things began to appeal to me, it was basically when I got the 3-second elevator pitch of Islam, 30-second elevator pitch of Islam, meaning just like there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. I was like, and they were like, oh yeah, so God is God and man is man. Even the best of men or women are human. That made sense to me. I was like, that's what I'm looking. And so then it began a whole journey of going deeper into it and understanding it. But in relation to my mom, I was a full-fledged adult. And so at that time, I'd already kind of had my calluses built up in my own way. And I was putting on my shields of manhood and whatnot on some like, look, this is what I'm doing. And, you know, and we got through it over time. It took time, you know, and I think if I was on the other side of that, anything that you believe, that you hold to be true, you believe it's true. Doesn't mean that you're not open to change or new information and evolving and all that. But I think if I put myself, just related to the religion issue, you know, you really believe that you're like, oh, this is the difference between life and death after this life. So you need to understand this message, son, right? Like that's the energy, right? And I get it because I'm her child. But I just have done different studies. I have different information, and it's just things that ring off my spirit just ring off in a different way.
You know what though? I mean, I feel like this concept or perspective of you being a heretic or a pariah, leaving, I say with quotes, is something that for the most part, and this is just my personal perspective, I feel like the departure does not have to do much with our departure after life here on earth. I feel like it's this perspective that has been ingrained in us Westerners as a form of cultural racism.
Yeah.
And I feel like this could be applied to so many different sects. I mean, there's a reason why if you bring up voodoo, it's something that we all look at as evil because of how it's been portrayed to us.
Right.
Even though
who's had the power to message it?
Exactly, right? Because when we left or when we were captured and when we were brought here, we weren't allowed to bring that stuff over here.
Right.
You know? But in other countries in Latin America, they're not ostracized for practicing that, right? So when we think about race, race is a social construct, it's a fallacy. It was something that was promulgated to help legitimize the perspective and acceptance of a slaveocracy, right? And then when we're dealing with race, it's also a very amorphous term because it is something that evolves
Yeah.
based on the circumstances of time, right?
100%.
So when we use this buzzword, this term, Muslim, if I go to the middle of America and say that word, a substantial amount of them think that that is something that is synonymous with race. I feel like they can't even
And or
see-
terrorism, right?
Well, yes, of
Yeah,
course.
right.
This goes back to these ideas coming to
Yeah.
ideologies,
Yeah,
right? But who's feeding them these ideas?
Yeah.
So like, being Muslim is not a race. It's a religion that connects people through faith,
Right.
obviously. But America has this binary approach where if you're westernized, you're civilized. But if you're Muslim, you're uncivilized. It's analogous to us being creatures
Yeah.
from the jungle. I view this as cultural racism, as race doesn't need to be qualified. It's bigotry at its finest, and any depiction of murdered Muslims or blacks that cause fear to white safety is what I feel they look at as bigotry porn, right? So I say all this to go back in time for us. We remember when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
We know how America was before 9/11.
Yeah.
Obviously, if we're thinking about anything Muslim, a turban has to come up,
Yeah.
and terrorism has to come up.
Right.
But after 9/11, it was on a whole different level,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And if you think about pictures of Saddam Hussein being murdered, you know, everything regarding Al Qaeda and all that, it was, to me, obviously, I understand why we were at war. I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
But what a lot of their murders symbolize to me is beyond fixing that terrorist problem.
Yeah, of course.
And then that connects to Trump
Right.
doing the Muslim ban.
Right.
So like, when America
How
hears
these
that,
policies continue to live out, right?
Exactly.
Over time because
Exactly.
of perception. right?
exactly.
Right.
So if you're in the middle of America,
Right.
and you bring up the term Muslim, you view Muslim as a race, not as something that a black man like yourself can choose to follow as a religion.
Right.
And this takes me back to a speech that Martin Luther King made in '67, and it's called the Beyond Vietnam speech. And it's where he reflects his silence as a leader and America's lack of self-awareness, right? Because America follows those that they believe are smarter than them. So in here he said, a time comes when silence is betrayal. That time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. Over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silences and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. At the heart of their concerns, this query has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people, they ask? And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I am nevertheless greatly saddened. For such questions, meaning that the inquirers have not really known me, my commitment or my calling. Indeed, their questions suggest that they do not know the world in which they live. So 55 years later, I ask you, do you believe that Americans understand what America actually stands for versus the idea it proposes as its moral foundation?
think some do. I think some do. But I think the thing that probably plagues our country and our world is the lack of self-awareness.
Yes.
And so I think that there is probably a lot of people in our country that are not aware of how they may contribute to systematic racism or oppression or policies that inherently discriminate or,
Right.
you know, and so, but then still think that, well, I'm not racist, I have a black nephew or whatever, right?
Right.
Like, you know.
Right.
And so I think it's, and again, going back to something we spoke about earlier, and
Yes.
like humanizing and conversations and all that, as trite as that may be, and as much as a nuisance and annoying some of these conversations may be to have.
Yes.
I've been having them my entire life. The fact is that we have to continue to find ways to connect. And I'm not saying it's our responsibility to humanize ourselves all the time.
Yes.
What I'm saying is that we have to continue to find ways to connect in order to impact those who aren't aware, to impact their awareness. That's why it's like, post this, because people are in some ways through that little tool trying to get that message out there so much.
Yeah.
To where people who don't give a damn about COVID deaths in Orange County or whatever eventually see something, right?
Right.
You know, would name the issue, you know?
Right.
And so I think I definitely think what's obvious over the last 4 years is that there's an issue with the larger body of our country knowing their true selves and being ready to be honest about that.
Right.
I mean, if you take the whole collection of individuals and you make it one body, there's a large element that is not able to see itself reflected in the mirror or doesn't have the capacity at this moment to be honest about the things that need to be improved.
It's because people get blinded by patriotism.
Right.
You know, there's like this intransigence of the blind where they refuse to see anything else because they're not truth seekers. And
Right.
this goes back to our earlier discussion regarding the concept of humility, right?
Right.
So when you think about what America stands for, the framers of our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, they created this substantive law to protect white land-owning men,
Right.
not women,
Right.
not people of color. And these words that they used were deliberately ambiguous, but operationally pro-slavery, pro-subjugation. So when we go throughout time and look at the court cases like Dred Scott that said black people aren't citizens, and we go through all of these eras where we're using our voice to remind people of our value,
Right.
we get to understand what America actually is. We get to actually see the vestige of the machinations of the past that are still with us. But it's hard for people that don't feel the struggle to know where we're coming from.
And understand how it's still playing out, right?
Exactly.
Because the thing that impacts your perspective, if you're coming from a place of privilege, you've always had it, so you don't know what you don't have, right? So you're trying, as a black person, you're often trying to explain the things that you haven't had.
Yes.
Even once you become very successful, there's a certain thing that you don't have that is necessary to prepare you for that moment.
Right.
And so you're often trying to explain that and to do some very difficult work to figure that out for yourself.
One of the things I was thinking about, especially in the last election, was the concept of disenfranchisement, right? And I'm talking about not just us feeling disenfranchised as people of color, but how laws can be created that target us so that we cannot use our voice. And we're one of the only democratic countries in the world that do not allow felons to vote after they completed their prison sentences.
Right, right.
But then when you think about this, 13% of black men in this country are convicted felons.
Mm-hmm.
13% now are disenfranchised.
Mm-hmm.
And in over 10 states, about 20% have convicted felons that are black.
Mm.
They can't vote.
Mm.
In Florida, they have laws on the books, nonviolent laws on the books, where if you just have some drugs or something, it's a felony. And now, because you're caught with that as a black man, you can't vote.
Mm.
So when we bring up the fact that we don't feel like we have a voice, at the same time, the system is targeting us
Mm-hmm.
and ensuring that we can't speak to usurp the concept of white imperialism. So going back to posting, going back to you being a public figure, me being a public figure,
Yeah.
as we get older with children, we better understand our duty
Yeah.
to educate people, because we live for posterity. We live for change. We want to ensure that our kids don't suffer the way that our parents did and our grandparents did. you
Right,
know?
right. Yeah, 100%.
So, in your acceptance speech for winning Best Actor in Moonlight, you thanked your teachers for teaching you. You said, "It isn't about you, it's about these characters." Why is the portrayal of the black character arguably more delicate than that of a white actor playing a white character?
I don't know if it's more delicate, but if we use that and say it's more delicate, I would just say because there's less of it. It's more vulnerable. It's less, and especially when you think about three-dimensional iterations of black masculinity from black voices. Up until that point, had been few and far between.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think that's why it also worked, is because we hadn't seen enough of it, right? And so then I think what Barry Jenkins is so wonderful at doing is he's great at getting you to sit down and sit still and go on a deep psychological journey with a character. Like so much of Moonlight, if you look at those characters, it's all really in their head. It's an interior insulated film, you know? And so anyway, yeah, I'm rambling now. But
well, no, I totally agree with you, and we don't get to see a reflection of ourselves enough,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And it puts fear in other actors like yourself that may say, you know what, I want to be a cop,
Yeah.
but I know they're not looking for a black cop. There's this immediate flinching reflex on both sides. Can I do it? I know I can do it. Do they think I could do it? Well, let's kind of try to figure that out, you know? And going back to your character Juan in Moonlight, you know, you said you were so grateful to be able to have the opportunity to play Juan because you played a gentleman who saw a young man folding into himself as a result of the persecution of his community, and taking that opportunity to uplift him and tell him he mattered was very important to you.
Yeah.
Did you see that kid as somehow analogous to you when, I mean, you weren't a kid obviously when you made your choice to become Muslim, but is there any parallels to you and your mother at that time?
You know, maybe it's hard to see them similarly because I think if anything, I really, in relating to that character in the movie, I just think more so to being a kid and being a loner, and being never being in any group, like always a little bit outside. Even when I was welcomed in that moment, I was never the dude who was in the clique. Even as a basketball player, like I was cool with everybody, like, but graduation night, I was by myself. Like literally, I've always been that guy who was like a little bit outside. And so that's just a lot of time in your own head. It's a lot of time reflecting. It's a lot of time, you know, not feeling fully understood. It's a lot of time holding on to information that you maybe need to share, maybe you need to talk about and can't talk to nobody about it. That kid spoke to me in a way, and he felt like, and anytime you see or feel that kid in the world, especially a little black boy who is a sensitive spirit, maybe he ain't the one, like someone picks on him, is like whooping somebody in a response, like there's these little like spirits that we gotta, that deserve to be taken care of and nurtured. And he was somebody who, at least through the lens of Juan, saw somebody that needed to be taken care of. Like, that ain't cool. And what was great about it is it didn't matter that Juan sold drugs. He's still a human who could recognize that that's not cool.
Right.
And I'm gonna look out for you, little man. Like, what's up? You good? And so I'm like, finally, because it wouldn't be necessarily amazing if a white guy had done that, because we've seen those attributes and those characteristics in that protagonist before, and that hero and that character before through the white capsule, right? We've seen that before. We just don't get to see it with that type of nuance coming from a black writer director. And it's not that people don't have the capacity to, it's just like, just very rarely greenlit. And Barry Jenkins is also a genius, but like there are other people who have the capacity along with Barry to make three-dimensional characters and tell stories about, you know.
That's why I refer to
tell complicated stories.
Artists like yourselves that are such great actors as hypothetical vessels for our own experiences, right? Because in watching that movie, we can jump into your shoes, we could jump into his shoes, we could jump into her shoes, but it's easier for us to morph or transform into that character if that character has the same skin color that we do, or is of the same ethnic group as we are. So it reinforces the importance of your work, you know what I'm saying? And also, you know, you are the first Muslim to win an Academy Award, right?
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. But for you, again, being Muslim is not a race, even though race is a fallacy.
Yeah.
Does it matter to you? I mean for you, not whether it's important, but to you, does that actually matter?
That's a really good question. I feel honored.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, by the Academy, of course, you know. But I just feel honored because God didn't have to let that happen.
Wow.
Right? So if it didn't have to happen, that means he wanted it to happen, right? So, or allowed it to happen at least, you know? And there's a big responsibility. It's a test too. All right, well, what you gonna do with it, right? Like, you can't just be all, you know, shiny stuff all the time. Like, you know, so so I think I'm humbled that after many years of feeling like frustrated and trying to bring dimensionality to flat things at times, I'm just so grateful that there were parts that began to open up for me. Luke Cage was a huge one for me. Like, I know it's not in some upper crust elitist, you know, art house entertainment, which I personally love, but that part for me, no one had ever written for me before. Like, going like, I'm gonna write for you, and Cheo like legit wrote for me. You know, once they weren't gonna kill me, I was like, all right. I mean, once they were gonna kill me still, I was like, all right, man, that's on you, bro, but I'm gonna try to kill this part. You're gonna pay for it.
Right.
But my point is, no one had written for me before. No one. And this brother was like, yo, I will write. He was so excited to have me, and it gave me so much confidence. And at that moment, I had gone through some difficult stuff, bro, from death to some real serious losses at that time. And so swinging into House of Cards and then finally like Luke Cage and that type of thing, leading up to the Academy Award for Moonlight, my whole journey has been me navigating this industry, trying to make sure that my faith didn't leave me, or I didn't leave my faith, and trying to, walk in this space that isn't necessarily conducive to Islam, right? And so to do that, and I had a dream. I told a couple people about this dream, and I didn't have no awards at this time at all, but I had a dream in the summer of 2016 about winning an award. And I was on stage and I had an award, and I was like, and it was during Ramadan. It wasn't the summer, it was like during Ramadan of 2016. And, but it actually, I feel like that was probably, if I look back on the calendar, because it moves 10 days, it was probably like June or something like that. June, July or something. And I remember, and the dream felt like warm. And again, my goal is not like, oh, what's your goal? To win 5 Oscars? Like, I don't think like that. My goal is to do great work and to keep getting better, you know? And when I watch my work, I still go, I need to get better. Like, that's my honest reaction to my work. Yeah. But I dreamt about winning this award, and I was on stage, and I was like, yo, that's bug. And I've had dreams over time, you know, and some of them come true or whatever in some way, however you interpret it. But you're supposed to tell people when you have a positive dream in Islam, because it's one of the 3 ways God speaks to, God can speak to you, right? And so dream life within Islam is really important. And you know, it don't have to be about awards. It could be all about all different types of symbols that could be warnings or anything. So I remember mentioning the dream to my brother, my friend, Amjid, and I mentioned it to my wife, and you know, just left it at that. And then I feel like it was a few weeks later, or a month or something later, or something like that, and I just remember it was within a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, I remember.
I got nominated for an Emmy.
Yeah.
And I was like, huh? And I was so thrown off by the nomination, because I was like, I was barely even on the show this year. And like, I felt like I'd done better work in previous years, but I dropped down to a guest star because I'd been trying to get off the show. Long story short, I ended up going like, yo, maybe that dream was about this Emmys. Like, that's crazy. So I remember I just seen the cut of Moonlight. Around that time of that dream, actually, I just ended up seeing a cut of, but I'm not associating the two at all. But this is just like, I'm gonna give you a long,
go for it.
I'm gonna give you a long Muslim story, basically. This is just how Muslims see, well, at least how I see the world. You start doing your little spiritual interpretations. So I had this dream. I get nominated for an Emmy. We got into Telluride, and we got into Telluride, and we ended up also getting into Toronto. We got into a bunch of film festivals. So the Emmy that I was up for, because it would have been aired on that Friday, not the Sunday or whatever. It was the Creative Arts Emmys or something like that, because I got nominated for guest star or whatever on the show. That would have been on a Friday, and I was like, nah, I'm gonna go to Toronto. I'm gonna go be with the team from Moonlight, because it just felt so special. And again, I was so surprised by the Emmy nom that I didn't feel like I could leave the loop of energy that was becoming Moonlight, having just been at Telluride. I was like, I don't know. And then so I ended up going to Telluride, Toronto, and so on and so forth. And then like all these little like awards start coming in, Critics' Choice or whatever, like little weird, you know, not weird things, but like just like you know, San Francisco, right, you know, journalism award, and you're like, whoa, this is weird. Way before Oscars like come out, you're like getting these little things, and I'm like, wow, this is kind of unbelievable. And then, so to cap it off, we get to the Oscars, And of course, like, I won the supporting role. And then the crazy thing is that the night that we won and they announced La La Land, right? And then, so everybody goes up for La La Land and they're standing there, and I had the strangest feeling, bro. I'm not kidding you. It was not like they made a great movie, and would never take away from, nobody owes us nothing. Like, there's no, like, Moonlight has to win that award. But I just had this weird feeling, and then I see this guy kind of walking out of the wings on the stage, and I was like, and I literally thought we won.
Wow.
And then and then we go up. Crazy thing, look up February, look up lunar eclipse, February 26th, 2017. There was an eclipse that night. Wow. When Moonlight won the Oscar and eclipsed La La Land,
wow.
There was a lunar eclipse that night.
Wow.
And I had dreamed about basically winning and so, by the time of that award season, I had a few trophies, but I had never won anything up until that point. So it was it was one of those things that came up so strong. When I woke up, I was like, I told my wife, and I've had other dreams before that, but for some reason I felt strongly that I had to relay that dream, because the reason it's important to relay dreams is because you don't control it.
Yes.
And so therefore it's more of a sign of God's presence, right? Because you say like, boom.
Yeah.
I had a dream about this. And then in some ways it manifests in a certain way. You're like, for you and that person who knew, you're like, that's a sign.
It's a divine.
That's a divine sign. I say all that to be like, I'm grateful and humbled by it, because it could have been anyone. There are other extraordinarily talented actors who practice Islam out there in the world, so it didn't have to be me.
Yeah.
But I'm really grateful that my work was recognized. I'm so grateful. More importantly than my work, I'm really grateful that the film was recognized in the way that it was, and that I think it feels like it's continued to impact filmmakers and be in the. I always talk about that movie because people always want to know about it and ask about it, and it just comes up in very organic ways.
It is important, as we established, because there's a double consciousness that served as an obstacle, something that should have ensnared you, something that has ensnared so many people to be able to getting to this stage, right? Because you're black and you practice Islam, right? So because you won that award, it not only changed your life, but it changed so many aspiring people in the world. You are now making somebody else's life better because they say, oh, he can do it, maybe I can do it.
Right.
And going back to this perspective that you have, I remember before I was recognized as an artist, and then people would ask my friends, oh, what is it like to be kicking it with Adrian now?
Yeah.
And they say it's like the same thing, right? But my point is that, and I say this with confidence, we knew we were dope. You just found out. You know what I'm saying?
Because you got to be the first to believe, though, right? Right? You have to be the first to believe, right?
You got to be the first to believe,
right? Right. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
Exactly.
And it's not you walking around going, man, I'm dope, I'm dope, I'm dope. It's you going like, this has to be said, and you like, all right, I got to get better at saying that. I got to get better at saying that.
Yes.
And eventually, you're just stuck on getting better at saying that.
Yes.
And hopefully, the people around you are like, yo, she's really good at saying that. Or he's really good at doing that, like whatever it is. And so your focus just always has to be on improving. Otherwise, at some point, I think the work and the connection begins to lose its resonance.
It's self-investment, because we're defining dope as you believing in yourself, because no one's opinion matters more than your own.
It's true.
And it's that confidence in being humble and truth-seeking, trying to find the best version of yourself, because that's an idea that turns into an ideology.
Right.
And something that I've always felt, since the first time I even saw you on the screen, to the first time that we met, to the first time that we were in the studio recording Luke Cage music, to before Moonlight was even nominated for anything, Cheo telling me and Ali Shaheed, man, yo, man, this fool's gonna win an award on this thing. And like, we're like, I mean, yeah, he's dope. Like, this should have been happening. It's, it's happening to somebody that we love so much in yourself. Your smile lights up the room. When you smile, I feel like it's a reminder to every black person in the world that we deserve to smile. And it's special because as a black man, we are born with dissonant voices.
Yeah.
But with your vigilance and your benevolent spirit, your voice has become harmonious to so many around the world. You are what I like to view as a permanent mirror because your reflection serves as our aspirations. And we see you getting better and better at your craft. And we're excited to see what else happens, my brother. I love you, man.
Brother, I love you, man.
Yeah,
I appreciate you so much, man.
Thanks for being on Invisible Blackness.
Thanks
man.
for having me, brother. Appreciate
Cool.
you.
Thank you.
Peace. I'm Mahershala Ali, and you are listening to Invisible Blackness with my man, Adrian Younge.